Hello, you guys. It's your girl XO Lizzie here. Historian by day and cosmetologist by trade, and that one Texas chick with high standards and faith. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, guys, so today I am going to give my first review of the cast and what I've read so far, and just give what I've highlighted, notes that I've made, and the thoughts behind it. If you hear squeaking, I am in a squeaking chair. I am at a middle school subbing right now, and it's a free period, I guess. So we're just going to go through what I've been reading. So I pretty much have like a post-it on each and every page. And the way the book takes off, it takes off with the man in the crowd. And the man in the crowd is a picture of a German man, a Nazi German man. He is standing in the crowd, and where a group of German soldiers, Nazi soldiers, are hailing. He is not. His arms are crossed, and it goes into what his backstory was like. He was in love with the Jewish woman, and he joined, and then seen the horrible nature, and then fell in love and all this stuff, and his love story. In the movie, it was really interesting to just see that kind of play out as far as like the timeline, but also comparing it to the book. I like how they displayed it in the movie. Because usually sometimes it may start chapter 1 in the movie instead of like doing the preface, but they added the preface in there, so really nice. So with the chapter 1, the title of chapter 1 is the afterlife of pathogens. And what that talks about is there was a place in Siberia, tundra in Siberia, that had these deer herders in 2016, and in that area it reached like all-time heat wave, and the ice started melting and things of that nature, and the deer got into something, and the herders were getting sick. And what they started to realize was these herders in 2016 were being affected by chemicals, anthrax chemicals that were exposed in the 1940s during the last war. And so these chemicals have been frozen, they've been mutating, and they've been getting stronger over the past 60, 80 years. And then these herders are being affected by it, and we see that in our country, and she makes that connection. I do enjoy that about Miss Wilkerson in her writing. She makes these analogies. She gives you like this big picture, and she draws this very factual picture. It's not like she's giving you made up analogies. She is giving you facts. And then she is also, like, she's giving you the interconnectedness of everything and how things are connected. She is not just saying one thing as an event that cannot be related to one thing, or she's saying that we see this here, we can also see it in a different form and fashion in our country, in our democracy. We may not see these anthrax chemicals ourselves and get sick by these chemicals ourselves, but there is a toxin of racism that has been in our country. And although after Obama and after I think who was before him, I think it was Clinton. So after, I don't know, either Clinton or Bush, Obama, basically more or less after Obama, we see and even in like as generations and as times evolve, we see less racism, but what the racism was basically was being frozen. And in 2016, at the same time, in the same year that we see this chemical take over these herdsmen and these deer in these areas, we see our country revert back to its racist ways, and we elect Donald Trump, somebody that we thought that would never really make it, right? And she says this: the human pathogens of hatred and tribalism in this evolving century has never died. It lay in wait, sleeping until extreme circumstances brought it to the surface and back to life. And we see that with the Siberian tundra town, the Siberian tundra. And then we also see that connected to America and the Voting Rights Act and them taking the rights away. And so we see this like slow dog walk of histories connected, but also the connectedness of, and I feel like she does this on purpose, but also this is her style, because I feel like to connect to a broad audience, there are going to be some people who only see in, what is that called? That is called bigotry. They only see what they want to see. They only see what they understand to see. But then when you throw out an analogy, you throw out something else useful in history that can be connected, and then you see them make that connection themselves and not making them for them, because sometimes people don't have an issue with the fact or the history. They have an issue with you making that connection for them. They want to make that connection for themselves, because if you make that connection for them, they're going to believe, or once they understand that what they believed their whole entire life or for however long, for a specific amount of time, was not true, and that is the basis of their moral character, it then becomes an identity crisis, right? And so now we're in murky territory, and now you may get somebody who at first really wanted to be proactive, but now or really was fighting for something, whether it's right or wrong, and now they don't care what they're fighting for. They just want to be right, if that makes sense. So they don't care. They just want to be right or wrong. And that's what we see in a lot of narratives today. So I appreciate that in Wilkerson's writing, because that is important, especially when you're dealing with adults. And that's what I've also learned as an adult. Dealing with children, you're telling them, the stuff that happened. You may have to have a conversation because what their parents say or what they know, understand. But for majority of it, you're telling these kids the history. When you get into adults, then you are something with a lot of older adults too. Their reality was manufactured. And so to then express to them how the reality was manufactured, because that wasn't true reality. That was the white picket on your side, which they purposefully made it so it looked like this over here, So yeah, I feel like that was a little tangent, but yes, there is an extreme circumstance. She says an extreme circumstance that is brought up in the Siberian tundra. The circumstance was heat. In our circumstance, it was our election. And with that election, it put a lot of pressure. And what Trump was doing, and he did well. And although there is still conversation about, was it rigged and stuff like that, at the end of the day, the racism in America did not vanish. It was just suppressed, right? And so we have this jar with this this lid on it, and the fire is going down, right? But the fire of racism truly doesn't die out, because it is instilled into the foundation of our country, so it can't truly die out. But the fire was dim. Not burnt out, but dim. And what Trump did was, and it was dim because society was saying, no, that's bad. No, that's bad. We don't talk that way. We accept everybody. We love everybody. And what Trump did was he took the lid off of that jar and said, basically everything that those people, whether he agrees with it or not, or whether he said everything that those people wanted to hear, right? So much so that like his broader audience were maybe, and people are like, how can he say, oh, I grabbed her in her private area and stuff like that? How can he get away with that? But what you don't realize is there was a part of that dim light of racism it was basically bigotry. So you have your homophobia, you have your misogyny, you have your misogynistic men who was being told about Women's History Month, who was being told about all, like, just women this, women that, women this, women that, we can do this, we can do that, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it. And he's had to put up with her doing it for so long. And so he's had to have the coworker that's a woman. He doesn't necessarily want her there, but he's had to kind of have to get used to it. But then you have this man who's running for president who took the lid off the jar and said exactly what I've been thinking this whole entire time. Regardless if I don't agree with anything else that he is saying, he said the quiet part in my brain out loud. I run with him. In the summer of 2008, the U.S. Census Bureau announced its projection that by 2042, for the first time in American history, whites would no longer be the majority in our country. So I was thinking, well, if the whites are no longer the majority in less than 30 years, what would a white nationalist do now to prevent that from happening? If that's something that has already been set in stone, not set in stone, but already been a estimation for almost the past 20 years, and we are 20 years till. And especially that being the case in a country that they believe, they feel like they built as a white nationalist, you would want for you to remain the dominant class, for you to remain the dominant race. But now in 2026, we see a disparity, a disproportion in what we put emphasis on class. But thinking of this only in thinking of this in a white nationalist perspective, if I knew that the white majority was going to be gone in less than 20 years, what would I do? Right? And we are basically like halfway there. What would I do to kind of get that ball running so that this may not be in total effect, or to kind of start reversing these things? What do we start doing in the States? Well, in this last presidency, in the past year, we've seen ICE centers being, ICE deportation centers being installed and people being sent there. We've seen a division in our communities because who's Hispanic, who's not Hispanic, who feels safe, who doesn't feel safe, who's an advocate, who's not an advocate. We see the birthrights being taken away. So with that, abortion rates being being lowered, and with that, who were the main people getting abortions, right? We know that the urban communities, Black communities of colors, of course, they place Planned Parenthoods in those communities as resources. So that was a reason why individuals in those communities were getting abortions and getting the help they needed at an all-time high. But also, white women were getting abortions, and white women were the leading race in abortions. So although we're taking the rights away from women, we're also making it so that in the end, white women are having more babies, making so that the white majority stays a thing. And then we also see that in DEI, taking away of diversity, equity, inclusion. We no longer have to diversify campuses. We no longer have to diversify workplaces. We no longer have to diversify. And what that means is we can kind of subtly go back to the way that our country was before, not necessarily blatant segregation, but go ahead and start not firing, and not actually having any repercussions for the firing and for the losing of the job and stuff like that. And we also see less mixing and mingling between the races and community in places outside of, in public places. We're seeing less mixing in public places. So we see less Black women in the workforce. We see less Hispanic workers in the workforce, this and that, which then does contribute to the interracial relationships. And so we are already in steps, and I really think it's really good that Wilkerson, and I don't know if the movie wasn't the actual way, and if the actor, if they had that conversation of how her training process went in developing the book. But I love to see in the movie how her thought process and these thoughts were developing to the page that they are. I don't know how much of a connection that there is, but if there is a big connection, I truly do appreciate that, because it gives, it puts reality, it puts fact on what I sometimes can think is fiction, imaginary, or just a dream, right? And then she also goes into, I don't have it highlighted, but I do have this note, and hopefully I can find it. Okay, so we see she's still talking about, and we're like in the early pages. I'm literally on page 9 right now, but she is still talking about the presidency and the state of our country in the 2016, 2017, 2018 realm. And she does go into COVID. And we see in 2016, and also what's important to me is cycles and understanding cycles, understanding the time frame, understanding date and time, in comparison to, is this a cycle of behavior or a chronological cycle, if that makes sense? And that's how it kind of functions in my brain. But I did a journal about racial violence and the justification of racial violence and the different ways that we can get away with racial violence in Texas. And I was only speaking to specifically Texas, Bible Belt, South Texas. And I used Karl Marx's hegemony to justify racial violence. And hegemony is basically Karl Marx. He was a capitalist theorist. And hegemony is basically a justification in which racism or racial violence or the difference in class and difference in race, it is justified as in our society, in our everyday lives, simply because it has been around for so long. The justification is the action itself. And so using hegemony to argue why white women get away with their tears and how white women were attributed to lynchings back in the early 20th century, and how racial violence against Mexican Americans in the 20th century was attributed to hegemony and stuff like that. I no longer believe that hegemony is the end-all, be-all to the basis of racism or the way that things have been going for so long in our country. I no longer believe that hegemony as a justification, because it's been going on for so long. This is the way things are. I no longer think that that is valid, because there are active forces that are suppressing and it's suppressing and igniting. And so we have these forces and power that are simply literally just playing with the everyday people. They're just playing with the citizens of the United States under the realm of democracy. But at the end of the day, democracy doesn't even matter. The way that we vote doesn't even matter, because when it comes down to it, we still have holes in our government that a leader can go in and start division and stir up division. And at the end of the day, like, what happens when your leader intensifies diversity, intensifies division? Not diversity, division, because diversity is important. But what happens when your leader intensifies division, and when you're supposed to be the mixing pot of the world, you then become the place that nobody wants to go or be a part of, and the laughingstock of the globe, basically. And then she made this statement, and I do think it is true, and I do think that is part of the strategy in which they are using. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist and say that they started COVID, and COVID wasn't a man-made thing, right? But after COVID, and is it even after COVID is what she's talking about? Give me 1 second. Yeah. With the first Trump presidency, we see an increase in gun violence, and we see, like I said, he was intensifying. He was throwing fuel on the flame of the dim light of bigotry. And now that we have all of these bigots out there in the world who are wanting America to only be white, and white people only deserve to be in America, going into churches, going into places, anti-Semitism, all these different things are going on in the first election. Then we have a break, and then the second election, and he takes over, and she says the country was losing its capacity to be shocked, right? We have this uber rich guy who successfully failed at running businesses, right? Run our country, and then immediately as he gets into office, hate is spewed into the streets openly. No longer something that's like, you can think it but don't say it. And then we have, Biden and that presidency. That one was kind of mild. It was a mild presidency, still getting over some things. But then we have COVID, and COVID shocks the whole world, and we're losing our capacity to be like, oh my gosh, this has never happened before, or oh my gosh, in our lifetime. Because for a minute, these disasters were spread out, besides, the Great Depression, or the 20th century span between the 1920s and the 1960s, right? That 40 years. So we really only get like 40 straight years of maybe back to back. There's always something that's happening. And then we get from 1960 to 2026, we get maybe 80 years. Not even 80. I say about 60 calm years after that. And then after that, it's been fighting ever since. And so now we see in the span of the 250 years that this country has been established, right? 400 years of slavery, 250 years of us actually being a country, correct? Right? And we only have about 100 years. No, we only have about 60 years where everyone in this country is pretty much, for the most part, as equal as it has ever been. Right? And so now, after our 60 years of somewhat peace, we're circling back into terror and circling back into division. And it is sickening to think about, but in my brain, it is bigger than just this circle. I do believe there is a big connection that can be made, and with this book, The Caste, it is the foundation to what I'm getting to. And over the summer, my plan is to develop my thesis into something that is coherent and something that can be argued, and something that can be, something that can be argued, but something that I can still be solidified in the argument in, not something that like I believe, like a bigot, something that I believe and I'm only going with what I believe. No, it can be researched, argued, and then, proved to be an actual theory. And then she also goes on to say, she gives analogies, she gives context, she gives an example. She does that because in this instance she's using the example of an earthquake, the tectonic plates sliding under the other. And she says, and only recently have circumstances forced us in the current area of human rupture to search for the unseen stirring of the human heart, to discover the origins of our continents. Discontent. I don't know what that said. To discover the origins of our discontent. And it's just a really, really, really good read. And from that, what I understood is, as the American people, we enjoy being pacified, and that is true. We enjoy everything being okay. Who doesn't? Who doesn't like the idea of everything being okay? I think for a specific group, for certain groups in this country, we have the reality of that isn't the reality for everyone else. But I do think in the past 40 years, we have been pacified enough. We have been pacified enough to forget. And I was reading this book earlier, and hopefully I took a screenshot of it. And the book is called Becoming Mindful, Silence Your Negative Thoughts. And it's basically about overthinking and things of that nature. But it said something really, really important the other day when I was reading. And hopefully I can track it back in my thoughts while I'm thinking about it. It was talking about the hippocampus of the brain. And it says, think of the hippocampus as a memory elephant. Confusion occurs when the guard puppy, and the guard puppy is basically the sensor in your brain that says you're in danger, there's an issue, there's a problem. The guard puppy begins to bark a warning of danger where none exist. And because the guard puppy is telling you that there is danger, there's something is wrong when there is nothing wrong, your brain starts to protect itself. In your hippocampus, your memory elephant starts to feel confused because there is no danger, but your brain is protecting itself, and then you begin to forget, right? And I think that that is where the state of America is, and it has been for, I would say, for the past 40 years. Our dog is barking on the outside, right, of the house at the street, is what I'm trying to say, when the burglary is going on inside the house, right? So we've been pacified, and we see nothing is wrong, and so our brains have been actively forgetting the racial violence, actively forgetting all these. It makes sense in my brain, and hopefully I'm making sense right now. But we've gotten to a point where now we've forgotten, and our memory is no longer there, right? Because also in our community, as a Black community too, as the guard dog, not comparing the Black community to the guard dog, well, kind of, we bark at so many movements. We bark at the LGBTQ. We bark for the Black and Black movement, the Black power. We bark for education. Our voices are always being expressed, always being, vocalized. But then in our own community, we kind of are forgetting some things, and not necessarily like, we know that there was slavery, we know that there's racism, but we're forgetting how gruesome the stuff was. We're forgetting how they used to eat us, and how they want us to forget these things, and how we've been pacified for so long. And so getting to the origins of our discontent, and that's the name of the book, the origins of our discontent. Why do we stay this way? My question more so is, well, that's one of the things I think that we've been pacified. That's one of the things that I want to prove in my theory, that you can get away with these things when you use strategies like this, when you understand the brain and you use strategies like this. And of course we know these things, but I'm learning these things, and so I enjoy learning and sharing what I'm learning. And I believe she finished basically this chapter, or this portion, drawing back to the pathogens and from the beginning. She's made different analogies, different examples, but then she draws back to what she said in the beginning in the original Siberian tundra story. And she says those herders, they had gone years without vaccinations because it had been decades since the last outbreak, and they had felt the problem was in the past, right? They felt like they no longer, and like, that's what I was saying. Whole time I'm starting over my words, and that's what I was saying, right? We are actively losing memory because we believe that we're always in danger, right? Instead of when we're focusing on when we're actually in danger, we believe that we're always in danger, speaking for everyone. And so we're losing the effect on our community, right? And is in the end also working against us, because we are helping everyone else out. We're actively also forgetting our own history, not just within our community and the impact in our community, but we're actively forgetting our history. My questions at the end of this chapter, my questions were, while they grow in radicalism, in their forms of radicalism, redistricting, gerrymandering, voting X rights, and DEI, and the rollback of this and the rollback of that, as they grow in what they believe their version of radicalism is, as it refers to what their agenda and what they're trying to push forward, white nationalism, as they grow in their strategies in that regard, what do we do? And why don't we? And my thing is, where are our Black leaders? Where are our little cabinet meetings, Black cabinet meetings, our salon meetings, when we're talking about, okay, if something actually goes down, because what they're preparing us for and what they're actually trying to elude us into, but distract us from, like, they're preparing something behind the curtain, right? And they're like, yes, we're preparing something behind the curtain. We'll see what it is. We'll see what it is. And we're just dumb, sitting there like, oh my gosh, let's see, while they're literally preparing a weapon to destroy us with. You feel me? So I'm like, why aren't we doing that in our own right, in our own way? The virus in our nation is in the roots. We need to dig up and burn it. It's so, the racism, our country was built on the backs of other people. So our country can never be what we want it to be, because it was never that. We have to create that. We have to create it, and we create it by destroying everything that we have now. And that's my true opinion. Because before they reversed not the majority plan, where by 2042, white people will no longer be the majority, as they're actively trying to reverse what that estimate was. What are we doing? What is our plan to get everything together? And I feel like our country, they are playing in our face by way of democracy. They are, like I say, they're pacifying us. They're treating us like little babies, playing peekaboo, playing you got to be quicker than that, catch me if you can, with us like we're little children, when we're tax-paying, voting people. We can get you in and out. And also, we bleed just like the rest of you. So if we actually decide as a people to do something, we can actually get something done. But we're constantly being pacified, one, and then fed lies and propaganda. And so we really don't know what is the truth. And right now we're being censored. So we truly don't know what is fact, what is fiction. It's a weird place to be in right now. And as a 22-year-old, like, I literally just got here, just started voting a couple years ago, first time voting, very excited about that. But with my first time voting a couple years ago, very excited to vote for Kamala, and then for Trump to win, and then for us to fast track into what we are and what our society looks like today. It seems very drastic if you don't understand the history of our country, but it seems to me more like a firework on the 4th of July, expecting to hear fireworks and gunshots at the same time. If you hear either or outside of a specific time realm, you can say, okay, if you hear on January 1st, you're like, okay, those are more specifically fireworks. If you hear it on a random Monday morning, you think, okay, those are gunshots instead of fireworks. But if you hear it on the 4th of July, you think, okay, it could be both. And just like that, in the same sense that it's both, that it's been covert and very obvious. It's been both, and it's been obvious in the ways that we expect it to, and very covert in the ways that go over our head, of course. And it's just really difficult but definitely a very prevalent time. And that is basically the first chapter of the book. And getting into the next part of it the next time. And I guess venting in my vehicle, even though I'm not in my vehicle, it still falls upon the audio video recordings. So let's just pretend that I'm in my vehicle. And just calling to say hey.